welcome to the deep dive. Usually when we talk about history, we tend to look at the grand sweep of events, right? Like armies clashing, massive treaties being signed, crowns violently changing hands, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the big macro level stuff.
Exactly. But to start us off today, I really want you to picture a much smaller, a much more intimate image.
Okay, set the scene.
So it is July 5th, 1535. A man is locked inside this damp stone cell in the Tower of London.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And he knows with absolute terrifying certainty that he is going to be beheaded the very next day.
It's a chilling thought.
It really is. And he's sitting there in the dim light writing a final letter to his beloved daughter, Margaret. But he doesn't even have a quill or ink.
Right. He's totally stripped of everything.
Yeah, he is scratching out his final thoughts on a scrap of paper using a literal piece of coal. And that man is Sir Thomas More.
It is such a haunting visual to begin with. You have this absolute stripping away of all worldly power, status, and luxury. And it leaves just a father, the shadow of his impending execution, and that crude piece of coal.
It's intense.
We are so conditioned to view historical figures as these unshakable marble monuments. But in that specific moment, reading those scrawled words, the sheer human reality of it just hits you incredibly hard.
It really does. And getting to that human reality is exactly the mission of our deep dive today.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we are looking at this massive stack of the English correspondence of Sir Thomas More. And these letters, they span 3 decades.
From like right up to the end, right?
Right up to his final days in 1535.
Oh.
And the goal here for you, the listener, is to map the spectacular rise and the devastatingly tragic fall of one of history's most fascinating minds.
And doing it entirely through his own words, which is the best part.
Exactly. We're unpacking how a master of politics and diplomacy navigated just a full-speed collision course with absolute power.
Well, to set the stage for you, the sheer variety in these sources is just staggering.
Totally.
I mean, we are looking at high-level diplomatic dispatches sent to Cardinal Wolsey and King Henry VIII.
Right.
But then you also have deeply personal letters to his family, incredibly fierce theological debates, and toward the very end, his desperate, meticulously crafted legal defenses.
Like a huge spectrum.
It is. What emerges from this stack of paper is a portrait of a man who is calculating, brilliant at strategy, yet stubbornly bound to a completely unyielding internal conscience.
But, you don't end up in the Tower of London as a high-value political prisoner without first being near the top of the food chain.
No, you definitely don't.
So to understand how far More fell,
Mm-hmm.
we really have to look at how high he climbed.
Right.
And his letters from the 1520s paint a picture of a workload that would break most people today.
Yeah.
He is the ultimate insider.
Oh, the grueling schedule is just wild to read about.
There are letters detailing these exhausting late-night meetings, like More having to bring Cardinal Wolsey's dispatches to the king at midnight at Woodstock.
Midnight. I mean, the man was always on call.
Always. And he's juggling these massive international crises, like managing the logistics of the Siege of Boulogne.
Yeah, and debating the movements of the Duke of Bourbon.
Right, and he's constantly tracking what they called Almains, which, let's pause there for a second. Who exactly are the Almains he's so worried about?
So Almains was the 16th century English term for Germans.
Okay.
But in this specific context, More is talking about tens of thousands of heavily armed German mercenaries.
Oh, wow. Mercenaries. That changes things.
Completely. These were professional soldiers who fought for whoever paid them, and they were notoriously volatile. Like, if their pay was late, they would mutiny or just sack a city.
So they were a massive wild card.
Exactly. So More is having to meticulously track their movements, figure out who is paying them, and assess whether they are a threat to English interests on the continent. It's high-stakes geopolitical calculus.
Okay, let's unpack this because it gets even more intense.
It really does.
In 1529, he is at the Treaty of Cambrai alongside Cuthbert Tunstall and John Hackett.
Right, a major negotiation.
Yeah, they were negotiating with the French and the Imperials over these massive war debts and indemnities. And There's even a letter where More is leveraging a fleur-de-lis.
Oh, that part is fascinating.
Right, because at first I thought he was talking about a literal flower, but he's actually negotiating the return of the French crown jewels, right?
Exactly. So the Holy Roman Emperor had captured the French king and demanded this exorbitant ransom.
As you do in the 16th century.
Right, standard practice.
Yeah.
And they were holding this massive jewel-encrusted gold piece shaped like a lily the fleur-de-lis as collateral.
Unbelievable.
And England was deeply entangled in financing these European wars. So More was literally in the financial weeds, haggling over the return of foreign crown jewels just to settle sovereign debt.
So he is functioning like a modern-day Chief of Staff, Secretary of State, and Treasury Secretary all rolled into one.
Yep, all at the same time.
Permanently on call to a notoriously temperamental king. My question is, how does someone survive that level of stress?
It's a great question.
When you are swimming in that much political mud, surrounded by massive egos, how do you manage the bureaucracy without totally losing your soul?
Well, you see his survival strategy in the very phrasing of his dispatches. What's really fascinating here is his ability to manage up without triggering the king's ego.
Managing up is so crucial.
Oh, absolutely. He employs this thick layer of 16th century flattery. He routinely praises Wolsey's politic wisdom and his ornate device in drafting letters.
Ornate device, I love that.
Right, but underneath the flattery, More is doing the actual steering.
Give me an example of that.
So if King Henry has a raw, reckless reaction to a foreign threat, More doesn't contradict him.
Because that would be dangerous.
Exactly. Instead, he agrees enthusiastically and then subtly introduces logistical roadblocks. Like he'll point out the impossibility of victualling an army in winter or the danger of overextending supply lines.
Oh, that is incredibly smart.
He makes the king's grand ambitions face reality without ever making the king feel challenged.
It's like he had a mental firewall installed. On one side, he's running the chaotic, pragmatic operating system of English geopolitics.
Yes.
But his core drive is on an entirely separate network.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's hard to imagine anyone maintaining that separation. You can't be that deep in wealth and power without it changing you.
You would think so, but the sources give us a jarring look into his private mindset that proves that Firewall actually held up.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
There is this letter from September 1529 to his wife, Lady More, or Mistress Alice.
Right.
More is at court at Woodstock, deep in those international crises we just discussed, and he receives an urgent message. His massive barns and his estate in Chelsea, which were packed full of the season's corn, have burned to the ground.
Oh, no.
And the fire was so bad it took his neighbors' barns with them.
And we need to clarify the stakes here for the listener. This isn't just like a minor property damage claim.
No, not at all.
For a Tudor estate, losing the harvest is devastating. It is a massive economic blow, borderline financial ruin, not to mention the immense legal liability of burning down your neighbor's livelihood.
It's a total disaster.
So most people would immediately panic and drop everything.
They absolutely would. But Moore's response to his wife is extraordinary. He tells her not to panic.
Wait, really?
Yes. He instructs her to take the entire household to church and thank God for the fire.
Thank God for the fire.
He writes that God's wisdom better seeth what is good for us than we do ourselves. He insists they should be glad of the visitation.
I read that and had to do a double take. He literally tells her to be glad the barns burned down.
Yes. And then he goes even further. He issues a strict command that his poor neighbors must be fully compensated before his own family recovers a single penny.
Wow.
He writes, "There shall no poor neighbor of mine bear no loss, and I should not leave myself a spoon."
That is wild. He is literally willing to sell every piece of silver in his dining room rather than let his neighbors suffer for a fire on his property.
It reveals his internal hierarchy of values in a way his public treaties never could.
Right. It's like finding a serene Zen master operating in the middle of a frantic Wall Street trading floor.
That's a perfect analogy. And this wasn't a new mindset brought on by older age or anything. Look at a much earlier letter from 1505 to his sister, Joyce Lee.
What happens in that one?
He gives her a translated work of John Picus Pico della Mirandola, a famous Renaissance philosopher who gave up massive wealth to pursue a spiritual life.
Oh, interesting connection there.
Yeah, and More stresses to his sister that true friendship is ghostly, meaning spiritual rather than bodily.
Ghostly friendship.
Exactly. His eyes were constantly fixed on the eternal. The wealth and power of his public life were just temporary tools. His soul was his actual reality.
But I mean, you can't be a spiritual purist while operating as the right hand of an absolute monarch forever.
No, eventually it catches up with you.
Right, that firewall is going to break.
Yeah.
King Henry's demands were inevitably going to cross that line in the sand More had drawn for himself. And that brings us to the collision course.
Yes. The collision occurs over what was euphemistically called the Great Matter.
The king's marriage.
Right. King Henry VIII's absolute determination to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon so he could marry Anne Boleyn.
And More writes this incredibly tense letter to Thomas Cromwell explaining the exact moment the rift began.
It's a very revealing letter.
He describes the king pulling him aside, laying a Bible open before him, and pointing to passages in Leviticus to argue that his marriage to Catherine was against the law of nature.
And therefore, the Pope never had the authority to allow it in the first place.
Exactly. But More didn't just dismiss it. He writes that he read the books, he consulted with the king's almoner, Dr. Fox.
He really did his homework.
He did. But after all that study, More's conscience wouldn't let him agree with the king's theological math.
Mm-hmm.
So, More quietly steps down as chancellor, claiming his health is failing, and he needs time to prepare his soul for death.
Right. He was trying to execute a political fade-out.
The fade out, yeah.
He thought he could just retreat to Chelsea, keep his mouth shut, and survive. But absolute monarchs who are in the middle of tearing down the entire religious structure of a nation, they don't tolerate high-profile silent dissent.
Because silence looks like condemnation.
Exactly.
Which is exactly how he gets dragged into the incredibly dangerous orbit of the Nun of Kent.
Elizabeth Barton.
Right. She was a Catholic nun who started having these highly publicized, dramatic, prophetic visions. And many of them warn that if Henry married Anne Boleyn, he would drop dead within a month.
Which is highly treasonous.
Extremely. So suddenly, More is accused of treason simply for associating with her. He writes a desperate defense to Cromwell, explaining that, yes, he met with her, but he only spoke to her of general charity.
Though he does admit to giving her some money.
Right, he admits he gave her a double ducat, which is essentially a heavy gold coin, a major donation.
But he vehemently insists he refused to hear any revelation she had about the king.
He tells Cromwell he eventually realized she was a false, deceiving hypocrite.
And this raises an important question about how More operated under pressure. He is meticulously detailing his interactions to prove he didn't break the law.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Reading that letter, I have a major problem with it.
Oh, what's the problem?
Well, More was supposed to be one of the greatest legal minds of his generation.
Absolutely.
So, meeting with a rogue nun who is publicly prophesying the king's death and giving her a giant gold coin, it seems unbelievably reckless.
Yeah.
Was More actually just naive here, or was this a highly calculated game of plausible deniability?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of Tudor law, it was absolutely calculated, but it wasn't naive.
Okay, explain that.
You have to understand that More believed the law was an objective, physical shield. Under the old treason laws, you had to commit an overt act or speak malicious words against the king to be guilty.
Right, it required action.
Yes. More thought that if he maintained strict legal silence regarding the king's marriage and the king's supremacy, he was untouchable. He constantly reminds Cromwell in these letters that he never murmured against the new queen. He didn't actively oppose the marriage. He genuinely believed that the absence of active opposition, legally speaking, was a perfect defense.
Wait, so he thought relying on a technicality of silence was going to protect him against King Henry VIII?
That was the plan.
The same Henry who routinely changed the laws to suit his moods.
Yes, and that was his fatal miscalculation. He was relying on a stable legal framework that the king was actively dismantling.
Oh, man.
Henry would eventually pass a new treason act that made the very act of not swearing an oath to his supremacy a treasonous offense.
So the rules changed while he was playing the game.
Exactly. Silence was no longer a shield. It became a weapon used against him.
Because More believed that clamping down on his opinions regarding the king's marriage would save his life. He had all this pent-up intellectual energy.
Well, absolutely.
He couldn't speak about the divorce, so he poured all of his argumentative fire into something he felt he could legally speak about, defending the traditional Catholic faith against the new Protestant reformers.
Exactly. The diplomat completely vanishes, and the fierce theologian takes over. He unleashes his intellect on theological opponents because he cannot unleash it on the king.
Now, before we dive into this, I need to make a really important point for you, the listener. We are neutrally exploring the historical theology contained in these sources.
Yes, very important to state.
We are not endorsing either More's Catholic views or the Protestant Reformers' views. The goal here is simply to showcase the intensity of More's intellect and belief.
Exactly. We're just reporting what's in the text.
Right. And looking at the intellectual mechanics of these arguments, it is fascinating to see how his mind worked when the gloves came off.
Oh, the rhetorical firepower is staggering.
Whether you look at it from the Catholic or Protestant perspective of the time, the sheer force he brings is wild. Take his massive, scathing 1532 letter to John Frith.
Right. Frith was an English reformer who denied the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, arguing that the bread and wine were purely symbolic.
And Frith used a very logical argument, right?
He did. He stated that God couldn't put one physical body in two different places at the exact same time, so the Eucharist must be symbolic.
And More just loses his mind over this.
He really goes on the offensive.
He absolutely attacks Frith's logic. He argues that claiming an almighty, infinite God cannot do something is absurdly putting finite human limits on the divine.
Which leads to that famous analogy.
Yes. More uses this brilliant, albeit aggressive, analogy. He likens Frith's logic to a man who gives his bride a ring made of cheap rush grass instead of solid gold and tells her, hey, it's just as good a symbol.
It's such a biting comparison.
He drops all his diplomatic tact. He calls the reformers beasts and famously says he would not give the paring of a pear for his prayer.
The venom in that letter is startling compared to his courtly correspondence.
Like a totally different guy.
It is. But the true tragedy of his theological stance is revealed in a subsequent letter to Cromwell regarding the Pope's authority.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
It's quite the twist.
More is trying to explain to Cromwell why he can't reject the Pope's primacy. And he points out that for a long time, he himself wasn't sure if the Pope's authority was a human invention or divine law.
Right, he used to be on the fence.
But he states that it was actually King Henry VIII's own book, A Theological Defense. Henry wrote years earlier against Martin Luther that originally convinced More that the Pope was instituted directly by God.
The historical whiplash is incredible.
I mean, you can't make that up.
You have to remember that earlier in his reign, Henry was given the title Defender of the Faith by the Pope for writing that exact book. And More is literally citing Henry's own past writings to justify the very beliefs that Henry is now about to execute him for holding.
It's the ultimate tragic irony. The king's theology shifted completely based on his political and personal needs.
But More's beliefs, heavily influenced by the king's earlier arguments, remained anchored in concrete.
The ground beneath More moved, and because he refused to move with it, that legal tightrope he was walking finally snapped.
It did. The political reality caught up with his spiritual firewall.
Yeah.
Despite his brilliant legal defenses, his carefully parsed words, and decades of loyal service, More's absolute refusal to swear the oath endorsing the king's supremacy over the church left the king with no choice.
Henry couldn't let his former chancellor implicitly condemn him.
Exactly. That refusal leads straight to the Tower of London.
Which brings us to the final, most devastating letters in our stack.
These are tough to read.
In 1534, after he is imprisoned, he writes to Henry VIII one last time. He reminds the king of his past service, but acknowledges that the legal shield is gone.
He knows it's over.
He writes that he is ready for the loss of all that ever I may lease in this world, goods, lands, and liberty, and finally my life withal.
It's the fulfillment of the philosophy we saw in the letter about his barns burning down.
Totally.
When faced with the loss of everything, including his life, he leans entirely into his detachment from the material world.
And that detachment culminates in the letter we started this deep dive with, July 5th, 1535.
The day before the execution.
He is in that stone cell, scratching out words with a lump of coal to his daughter Margaret. And what strikes me is the incredible meticulousness of it.
Yeah, there is no panic at all.
None. He is sending specific blessings to Margaret's husband, to her little boy, to his own son John. He even remembers a specific mundane errand, asking Margaret to return a picture drawn on parchment to his other daughter Daunt's.
It's amazing he's thinking of errands at a time like that.
Right. And then you reach the emotional core of it.
Yeah.
He tells Margaret, I never liked your manner toward me better than when you kissed me last. For I love when daughterly love and dear charity hath no leisure to look to worldly courtesy.
It is profoundly moving because it shows a man whose priorities are finally perfectly aligned.
Yeah.
The man who managed massive international treaties and debated the greatest theologians of Europe is reduced to writing with a piece of coal. Yet he is more at peace than he ever was at the height of his power.
It's true.
And notice how he ends the letter. He expresses the firm hope that they may merrily meet in heaven.
Merrily meet in heaven. That phrase alone, it shows that his perspective from 1505, when he told his sister to focus on ghostly friendship rather than bodily wealth, it never wavered.
It stayed consistent his whole life.
The tower didn't break his worldview, it just proved it was real.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for us? We have traced Sir Thomas More through 30 years of his own words.
It's been quite a journey.
We watched him operate as the ultimate political insider, dealing with emperors, war debts, and mercenaries. And we watched him consciously choose to sacrifice all of it, his immense wealth, his high status, his physical freedom, and finally his own head, simply because he refused to compromise his deepest internal convictions.
He tried to survive using his massive intellect and the law.
Right.
But when forced into a corner where he had to choose between his physical life and his conscience, he chose his conscience.
And that is exactly why taking the time to read these letters is so relevant to you today.
Absolutely.
We live in an era characterized by an overwhelming flow of information, constantly shifting alliances, and immense social pressure to conform to whatever the current cultural or political consensus happens to be.
It's so true. Reading Moore's correspondence forces you to hold up a mirror to your own life and ask, what is my uncrossable line?
Yeah.
In a society that heavily rewards flexibility, PR spin, and compromise, what is the core belief that you would refuse to abandon, even if it cost you everything?
That is a heavy, necessary question. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive.
Okay. What is it?
We talked earlier about More's 1534 letter to King Henry, where he accepts the loss of his life.
Right, the one where he knows the shield is gone.
In that exact same letter, More writes that even if the king takes his head, he hopes they will once meet with your grace again in heaven, and there be merry with you.
It's such a striking line.
You have to ask yourself, is that the ultimate, purest act of Christian forgiveness? Genuinely loving the man who is actively sending him to the chopping block? Or is it the ultimate, quiet act of defiance? A polite, brilliantly worded, but entirely firm reminder to an absolute monarch that he too is mortal and will eventually have to stand trial before a much higher court.
That is a brilliant way to look at it.
Next time you feel the immense pressure to compromise who you fundamentally are, remember the man in the tower, the piece of coal, and the line he refused to cross.